My guest at this time is Carrie Severino. She is chief counsel at the Judicial Crisis Network, an organization that has been strongly supporting the nomination of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, who is testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee today following the testimony of Dr. Christine Ford. And Carrie, thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be here.
Well, let's kind of work backwards here because as you and I speak, Brett Kavanaugh has just finished a lengthy and very emotional opening statement, and he's now taking questions from members of the committee. What stuck out most to you from that opening statement? Wow,
it was so powerful. I think you really saw the real Brett Kavanaugh today. You saw why he's inspired so much loyalty, as he pointed out, in the dozens of friends that he has had since high school. The women and men who have stood beside him and said, this is, the person described here is not the Brett Kavanaugh that we know. And the other moments that were just so moving were when he spoke about his family, in particular, speaking about his 10-year-old daughter as they were saying their evening prayers together, saying that we should be praying for Dr. Ford as well. And how he repeated a couple different times, he means no ill will to her whatsoever. He didn't even know her well. I think he's not even sure he knew her there. And he said she may well. And I think for those of us who saw her testimony as well, it was very compelling. It seems that she probably did suffer some serious incident, but he went back again and again. This was not me, and how he still wishes the best for her. He talked about the calendars that he maintained, and that kind of got people almost making fun of him on the left. Well, he's not going to write down on a calendar everything, but it was actually a very amazing personal story of how his father used his calendar almost as a diary. And I was struck by that, looking at them. They've been made public, and seeing that he would write down after the games, what the score was, or if he missed a workout, he would cross it off. He'd put down the names of all the people he went to parties with. So it was a very detailed history of his life, and he says he's maintained those calendars 38 years. You can look at almost every single weekend. He was grounded a couple of them. He was traveling. It shows which house he was at. So that was very interesting to see as well. I think it's going to be it's going to be just one of the most powerful days of Senate testimony certainly I have ever been witness to.
Carrie, in watching social media as he gave that opening statement, you had a lot of folks, mainly in the media, which certainly tends to drift left, saying, he got angry. That's not a good look. That shows he might not have strong judicial temperament. What do you make of that sort of response?
Well, at the very beginning, I think at the beginning of his testimony, I don't know if I would, he was certainly passionate. And yeah, I think it's understandable for someone whose life has been turned utterly upside down by these allegations. And when you got to the end, he listed some of the specific reasons. I mean, he said, look, I am passionate about and love teaching students because of the circus and these allegations thrown around by people on this side of the bench over here, and he pointed to the Democrats. I may never be able to teach again. He talks about coaching girls basketball and how dedicated he is to making sure that young women who are interested in athletics are formed, have good leadership. He said, because of those allegations, I may never be allowed to coach children again. I mean, this is the impact it has, not to mention, obviously, his whole family being dragged through this, having to talk to his children about that. So I think you can absolutely understand why he's feeling frustrated. But I think it was, when Justice Thomas in his confirmation hearings was saying this is a high-tech lynching, I think that's a reaction most of us can identify with. If you thought, how would I feel if I was being falsely accused of something? And Judge Kavanaugh certainly says he's absolutely being falsely accused. He says, I never had anything to do with this.
Judicial Crisis Network has been putting out a number of ads in support of Judge Kavanaugh, and one of the more recent ones simply states, it didn't happen. Describe what went into that ad, and obviously it's kind of a he said, she said situation. There's no corroborating evidence or other witnesses to back up Dr. Ford's story, so that might be where that statement comes from. But explain why you decided to put it so succinctly like that.
Because I think at the end of the day, that is the bottom line. What we have on one side, and we saw Dr. Ford testify today, my heart goes out to her. I think she clearly, I believe, had experienced sexual assault. But I also saw that at the end of her testimony, we still had a story. that did not have any corroboration, still had no evidence to support it. None of the people who she identified as having been there at the time recalled the party. Several of them, even her close friend, who she remained close to still, said, I don't even remember that I knew Brett Kavanaugh at the time. I don't think he was at this party. And her own testimony, as you saw it, it was shifting and vacillating at times on who was at the party and how she got there and what. So there were a lot of holes in it. It's no surprise. It's been decades since this happened. I think that the challenge is when that is the sole allegation, something that is a very decades old, uncorroborated, unsubstantiated allegation, versus all the weight of evidence on the other side of people who say it didn't happen, they weren't there, his own unequivocal denial, and then the testimony of all those people who knew him at the time that said this is nothing like Brett Kavanaugh. That thin strand of an allegation is not something that you can destroy a man's decades-long career on a life of public service. The kind of person who could pass 6 background checks with not a hint of misconduct, and who, until these allegations, enjoyed one of the broadest reputations for respect, integrity on the federal bench. So it's a shame to see on such a thinly sourced really allegation his reputation be dragged through the mud this way.
What do you think of of Ms. Midgell, the woman the Republicans hired to ask the questions?
I have been very impressed with her. I thought she is coming across as very calm, thoughtful. It's challenging. She's following a very clear line of testimony. Obviously, it's challenging because the way the committee asks questions, they typically go from Republican to Democrat, back and forth. So her questioning wasn't as coherent as it would have been if, say, the Democrats had chosen to cede their time to one person. They could have. In this way, it was be 5 minutes of her, then 5 minutes of Senator Feinstein, 5 minutes of her, 5 minutes of Senator Leahy, back and forth. But I think she brought out some very interesting features about how the Democrats were involved in shaping this whole story. It seems that they're the ones who pointed her to Ms. Katz. She clearly established that they are the ones who leaked the story initially, which is really the source of causing Dr. Ford so much pain and suffering here, where she has been experiencing harassment and threats, and it's horrible. And she said clearly the only people I gave this letter to were Senator Feinstein and Congresswoman Eshoo. So it's someone from those offices who leaked it. And it also showed that her own lawyers seemed to be colluding with the Democrats to push her into doing things that she didn't want to do. She apparently was unaware, for example, that Senator Grassley had offered to have this testimony in a way that would have been off the record. And she said, I would have loved to come and just give testimony to the committee. I would have been happy to speak privately to the FBI. I would have been happy to speak privately to the committee. Her lawyer had said she wasn't willing to do that. She said she would have preferred to do it in California because she's very frightened of flying. She has claustrophobia and she hates to fly if she can avoid it. And they tried to use that as an excuse to delay the hearing, it sounds like, but they didn't. They ultimately ended up saying she had to do it here. Meanwhile, Senator Grassley the whole time was offering, we'll fly people out to California to do it at your convenience there if you'd rather do it there. So it seems they were not being forthright with their own client, which to me as a lawyer is a very shocking thing to discover. And it seems like they were colluding with the Democrats almost to use this for partisan advantage rather than even representing their own client's best interests.
Last question for you, Carrie. Obviously, this is going to come down to votes based on what you've seen so far. And as I mentioned earlier, we haven't seen the Q&A yet. But what do you think has changed, if anything, in the final calculus here? Well,
I think at the end of the day, Dr. Ford's story still has the same lack of corroboration and lack of evidence that we saw before. I think Judge Kavanaugh has very powerfully presented his own record and how carefully he has tried to comport himself as a judge. And I think, the senators are going to see that, are going to see that the consequences of going down a road of partisan attacks on character being the way we carry on our judicial confirmation process. I don't think that's something anyone wants to see. And that's what this is looking more and more like. So I'm feeling at this point, I think very few senators at this point are going to want to vote against such a qualified, universally respected judge in favor of what's, ever more looking like a partisan smear job.
Carrie, you've been with us at every critical juncture in this confirmation process. Thanks so much for your time today.
Great to be here.
Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel at the Judicial Crisis Network. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.